Entitled Karen tries to argue after I ban her kids from the water park. Here's how I shut her down. Working as a lifeguard at a water park, I'm no stranger to dealing with entitled guests, but this incident pushed my patience to the limit. Recently, I was promoted to head guard, a role that brought new responsibilities and challenges. Little did I know that one particular family would make my day unforgettable, and not in a good way. The day started like any other. I handled the usual head guard tasks, setting up the water systems, coordinate lifeguard rotations, and preparing the park for its 9 a.m. opening. Things were running smoothly until late morning when a family arrived. A mom, dad, young daughter, and 3 teenage boys. The boys, who looked to be around 17 or 18, immediately started causing trouble. Complaints about their behavior trickled in all day. They jumped between different areas of the park, making it difficult to catch them in the act, but the reports from guests and lifeguards piled up. By 4 p.m., during the second shift, things came to a head. A loud double whistle, a signal for accidents or urgent situations, pulled me from my duties in the first aid room. I hurried to find one of my lifeguards, who also happens to be a close friend, being yelled at by an irate mother. And her Karen. I approached and asked, "Can I help you with something?" Karen immediately began screaming at me. Yes, this jerk banned my son and his friends from this side for no reason. Before she could say more, I interrupted with, "Let's watch our language, please." Karen sighed dramatically and continued. This guard banned my boys unfairly. Recognizing the group of boys who had caused chaos all day, I told the lifeguard, "Watch your water. I'll handle this." Turning to Karen, I said, "Ma'am, I'll be honest with you. Your son and his friends aren't banned from the slide." She tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand and continued, "They're banned from the park." That's when Karen exploded. She yelled, demanded explanations, and called me every name in the book. After she calmed down enough to speak, she asked, "Why?" "They haven't done anything wrong," I replied firmly. "Actually, they've broken nearly every rule we have and have been causing problems all day." Scoffing, she demanded specifics. "What have they really done? What could they possibly have done?" "Well," I said, "they've gone down every slide the wrong way, jumped out halfway down, nearly hit other guests while playing dodgeball with basketballs, which is against the rules, and endangered themselves, my guards, and everyone around them. They could have caused serious injuries, like concussions or broken bones." Karen, still defiant, argued, "Well, we paid for a room for 2 nights. "That's not my problem," I replied, now visibly annoyed. "You, your husband, and your daughter are welcome to stay and enjoy the park. But your boys have to leave. They can either be taken home by one of you, or they can stay in the room for the rest of the night." Karen was stunned, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. But before she could speak, I cut her off. "Ma'am, this isn't a debate. You're in no position to argue. You're in a position to comply. If they don't leave in the next 10 minutes, they will be removed." Karen stood frozen for a moment, then stormed off toward the hot tub. Realizing she had no intention of using the time I'd given her, I called security over the radio. "Head guard to security desk, code yellow," I announced, a code for guest removal. Security arrived, found the boys, and escorted them to their parents and then to their room. I'll admit, I may have come off as a bit harsh, but Karen's combative attitude left me no choice. Because of her, I was late for my chemical check and completely done with the situation. Her earlier behavior, including calling my friend and employee a horrible name, cemented her place on my no-tolerance list. In the end, standing my ground and shutting her down was immensely satisfying. Karen thought she could bully her way out of consequences, but she was dead wrong. She absolutely deserved the outcome, and I have no regrets. Now to the next story, story 2. Stepdad takes my mom and his kids on vacation, leaving me home alone. I move to my dad's, and everything falls apart. I'm a 16-year-old guy in high school. 2 years ago, my mother married Eddie. My stepdad. Eddie is 42 years old. My mother is 40. My parents never entered into marriage. Actually, I was the product of a very brief fling following college that they assumed would last a few months. Then my mother started to conceive. She hired me since she wanted to end the pregnancy without calling for termination. My dad has shared custody of me since he too wants to participate in my life. Every month I move residences, spending the year alternately with my mother and my father, therefore distributing my time equally between them. I love my parents. I know both of them have given quite a lot of sacrifices for me to remain close by. The first and most important one is that they have spent years living in the same city, hence I wouldn't find the travel between the two houses to be too challenging. Previously unaware of this, now I see that both of my parents had to forfeit several chances to progress in their professions in order to stay in the same city and live near each other, all for my benefit. Thanks to me, my mother also had to turn away countless guys who were totally in love with her. Her priorities should have been parenting me rather than getting married and juggling her personal life, work, and husband. Eddie helped me to learn all these things. He is not precisely the ideal stepfather one could want for. To help me to accept him, my mother had to go over all of this with me. If she could make so many sacrifices for my sake, she believes I should be able to at least somewhat repay the favor and embrace Eddie. Since I never asked her to make such sacrifices, I find it difficult to properly grasp how that reasoning holds. She could have readily ended the pregnancy or allowed my father take over completely rearing me. Still, I love her and want her to be happy, so I never fought with her about it. Though Eddie wasn't a very lovely guy, I was eager to welcome him. By not a nice guy, I mean he is not nasty to me in any sense. Simply said, he doesn't like me. He doesn't try to hide it. Though I'm not sure what kind of 42-year-old has problems with a 16-year-old guy, he most certainly does. Since I never offended him, I'm not sure why he hates me. Actually, I have always tried to be friendly to him since my family taught me to treat everyone kindly, even if they show you their dislike of you. He never remarks on me and never talks to me disrespectfully. He doesn't talk to me at all, hence the reason behind this is straightforward. For the past 3 years, he acts as though I don't exist in the household. I have no idea what I ever done to irritate him, but one day he simply decided he would not be talking to me and would be acting as though I wasn't there at all. The craziest thing on earth, and I'm not really used to this type of treatment. He seems to be treating me coldly for something, but I'm not sure what that is. Not knowing what his issue with me is, I can't even change my conduct. According to my mother, that is his natural state. He doesn't particularly like me, but he doesn't have any problems with me. But, especially when you're 42 and the other person is essentially just 16, I believe that if you dislike someone there should at least be a cause for it. It probably relates to the dynamics of my being the first kid of my mother or anything. I have no idea either. He has made it rather clear that he hates me at least generally. We used to get along reasonably earlier. He would communicate with me and ask all kinds of questions about my life when he arrived home first few times. I would reply to him quite politely. But he just decided he would not be talking to me following one visit. It was quite haphazard, and at the time I had no idea why he did that. Originally, I didn't ask questions since I assumed he might have simply forgotten to say hello or anything. But then it occurred so often that it became difficult to overlook. Given that my mother was behaving as though I hadn't been in the house, I even asked her whether I had done anything to irritate him. Every time I walked into the living room or any whatever room he was in, he would turn his face away. Regarding that, my mother gave me no particular precise advice. She just explained that he was attempting to process the reality that he would now have to deal with the presence of me. Perhaps he was merely not used to it, as he had only dated women without children prior to this. Given his own 2 children, I found it difficult to believe. His 2 sons were 12 and 15 years old respectively. After the younger brother was born, their mother died in an accident. I used to see my dad every other month, hence it was untrue that I would stay there all the time. Still, a few months went by and finally I came to terms with Eddie's reality, that he was not going to talk to me any longer. Eddie proposed to my mother after a year of dating, and few months later they were married. Eddie moved in the residence with his children following their marriage. I had only visited his children a few times before, and even then their father had instructed them not to talk to me. It was simply so insane, I have no idea how I handled that for years, as a matter of fact. Eddie and my mother used to live apart before marriage since Eddie's mother stayed with him and was quite ill. He moved his mother in with his sister so she could look after her once they were married. Then Eddie brought his kids into our house. Though I'm not sure if any of you have actually gone through this, living in the same house with several people who won't interact with you and pretend you don't even exist is rather difficult. I had to put up with that, and based on their treatment of me, I felt like I was some sort of criminal, which made me terribly depressed. The worst aspect was that I never found out initially what I did wrong. I still have no idea. At least I'm not living with them anymore, hence it makes no difference. Years went by and their behavior remained the same, despite my adaptation to it. Eddie not talking to me whenever he came over to see my mother was already second nature to me, given his frequency. I grew used to him and his children living in the same house with me and not talking to me when they got married. Every time I visited my mother, I had to get ready psychologically to solely chat to her for the following few weeks. The only person who would talk to me in that house was her. Everybody else pretended I was invisible, absent. Although it hurt, I had to learn to deal with it as I wanted to spend time with my mother. She was not going to discuss it with Eddie, I knew. Trust me, I tried to persuade her several times to approach him about it, find out more, or at least try to resolve this. She informed me she had already discussed it with him, but she could not reveal to me some personal reasons. He thus denied to recognize my existence. She knew where Eddie was coming from, hence she could not act about it in the house, as she also knew why I felt guilty about it. I would simply have to swallow it and deal with it though. She would get emotional and tell me I was being unappreciative if I tried to stand up for myself and dispute with her as I was forgetting the fact she had made so many sacrifices for me. She thought I could surely deal with it for her benefit and pass Eddie for acting the way he did. Though I wanted to argue with her, I knew I would damage her emotions. I never even told my father about any of this as I knew he would be rather irate and would most certainly confront my mother about it should he find out. Often they had tiny conflicts and arguments since they were rather different people with rather different opinions on how to raise me. But I knew that something this big would most likely cause my father to seek extreme behavior or file for complete custody. I avoided telling him and acted as though everything was good with my mother and her new family since I wanted to avoid starting conflict. Eddie and my mother had been living together for 2 years following 1 year of dating before they were married. I have so been tolerating this kind of behavior for 3 years now. I have been stretched quite thinly and pushed to my breaking point. Something lately truly drove me over the line, and I realized I could not continue to put up with this. I was meant to spend last month at my mother's place. Eddie and his children had been excluding me as usual. Having been arguing with some of my school classmates, I was already going through a difficult period and truly not in the appropriate frame of view at the time. Then, one morning 2 weeks ago, I woke up to discover the house was totally empty. Over that, I began to go crazy. Everything had been usual, or as normal as it gets at my mother's house, up until the evening before. Though they had all been ignoring me and chatting to one another, no mention of them traveling any place was made. But when I got up the following morning, the house was deserted. I asked about it right away, phoning my mother. Though I had no idea where they were, happily my mother answered the call. She told me she and the kids were heading out on a small trip for the week and requested me to stay in the house and take care of it when I asked. Right now I'm on summer break, hence I have no classes and not really have to travel any place. I do not, however, believe it appropriate to leave me at home alone and expect me to operate like a watchdog. I told my mother as much, that I was not ready to spend all day observing the house from home. I was not on board with that plan. If she desired something like that, she most likely ought to have just increased the protection surrounding her house rather than fooling me into remaining at home. Their leaving me at home all by myself and not even informing me about their intention to go on a road trip infuriated me most as well. Not even the politeness to let me know about it ahead of time allowed me to make an informed decision on whether or not to undertake it. As a male in high school, there is practically nothing more we want than an empty house all to ourselves. So, I most likely would have answered yes. I might have lived it for a few days after inviting a handful of my buddies over. But my mother was treating me like garbage, so I was so enraged that I didn't even feel like doing it. It made me quite sick. I wasn't really having anyone to invite at the time since I was also battling with my buddies. I was just living through a generally terrible period. I advised my mother to apologize to me for doing this. Eddie disliked talking to me, so I could understand that, but the very minimum they could do was let me know they were headed somewhere before they went. Not very pleasant to wake up one morning and discover you or by yourself. She advised me that I should get over it as I was exaggerating things. She simply hung up the call. She did not even wait for my response. She texted me instead of answering when I tried to contact her back, claiming to be trying to enjoy her trip and would chat to me once she arrived at the hotel. Everything infuriated me so much that I chose to walk away. Though I knew the house would be empty upon departure, I didn't give a damn. My calls went straight to voicemail when I attempted phoning my mother once more to let her know I was going. She did not respond. My mother typically leaves the house locked, so I locked it and left the keys under a potted plant. I then headed over to live with my dad. My father had anticipated me to be living with my mother until the end of the month, so he was genuinely startled to see me back so early once I got there. But I had enough, therefore I just returned to him. I ultimately told him everything that had been happening. I told him all about Eddie and his outrageous actions toward me, as well as how he had even instructed his children not to interact with me. It was getting on me since I felt as though I had done something wrong, even though I had no idea what it was. Then, regardless of how much it hurt, I told him my mother simply wanted to let things go as it was and refused to even discuss this with Eddie. Eddie had personal motives, which she felt were legitimate, Thus her justification was that. She wasn't even ready to tell me what those motives were though, so I could understand the events around me. I had tolerated this for long enough, only for the benefit of my mother. She constantly reminding me of the things she had given up in her life to make me happy. She cited this as grounds for why I need to put up with Eddie's actions. But I was not going to take it anymore as this was becoming really excessive. I turned around. My father needed to know what my mother was subjecting me to, hence I had to inform him. Though I had done nothing to offend anyone, I was just so sick and tired of being treated like this, thus maybe he could be able to act about the matter. I had always aimed to treat everyone kindly and compassionately. I then informed him about how my mother had left me at home alone without even letting me know Eddie, his children, or her were on travel plans. She simply wanted me to make sure everything was in order, look after the house, and live on my own for the following week. That hardly constituted my main concern. Her lack of understanding of the need of informing me about it ahead of time caused me much trouble. She hung up and turned away my calls when I tried to chat to her, as if I didn't count to her. She had definitely crossed the line, and I could not stand it anymore. I started crying after I completed telling my father all of this. I had not known exactly how much over the past few years all of this had been weighing on me. Before she met Eddie, my connection with my mother was normal. Then, everything changed and nothing was the same afterwards. It was quite tough for me to understand. I felt small to her. When I vented to my father, he just told me he was going to look after everything for me coming forward. He clearly was agitated, but he did not show me his irritation. Rather, he told me he was happy I had shared with him and that right now it was all on my chest. He reassured me that I would be living with him from then on. If I ever wanted to visit my mother, it would be my decision only, but he would not advise it. I have been living with my father since then. I never tried to call my mother following that day. The odd thing was she never tried to phone me either. She had left her son at home all alone, so the least she could have done was stay in touch with him as she traveled with her new family. What she had done had emotionally wounded me, but after talking to my father, I felt much lighter. I had resolved myself not to let this disturb me. We seldom spoke for 5 days or so. Then, when my mother called at last, I assumed it would be to check on me. She was screaming at me at the top of her lungs when I answered the call though. The house had been stolen, hence it took me some seconds to understand she was yelling. Apparently, several of their possessions, including the TV and a few other pricey items, were now gone. She was attributing all of it to me for some reason. Given I had tried to let her know I was leaving and would be staying with my father, I'm not sure why. I told her I was offended with her treatment once she stopped screaming. I then reminded her that although I had tried to get in touch her numerous times after she hung up on me, she had continuously turning down my calls. I could have texted her instead, she informed me. Although that was a good point, I said I was upset and I didn't text her on intention. She shouldn't have expected me to stay in the first place since I thought it was quite clear that I was unhappy. We started a rather intense argument on it. She had been depending on me and thought I should have stayed at home no matter how furious or irritated I was since it was a safety issue. I informed her I never promised to shoulder such accountability. She ignored all of my calls even though I had tried my best to let her know I was leaving and didn't want to be home alone. She now had to deal with the results of her acts, not mine. That they, including Eddie, were trying to attribute this on me seemed absurd. Eddie visited me for the first time in years only to rage at me and accuse me of being reckless. He even mentioned some perplexing things, such as he had always known I would be the reason they fell apart. We hardly interact at all, hence I have no idea what that implies. How he arrived to that opinion without ever interacting with me is unknown. In any case, I agree with my dad as he believes this is my mom's fault and my parents are now bickering. My mother argues, nonetheless, that I am responsible. She is now demanding that my father cover the damages and contends that, should he be defending me, he should be ready to cover the expenses. Not sure what to do right now. She claims she will drop the issue provided I at least apologize to her and her family. Though I also don't want her to keep pestering my father, I do not want to do that. Am I terrible for leaving my mother's house empty to go live with my father after she and my stepdad left me home alone to travel with his family without even trying to tell me? Update 1. 2 weeks after the incident, a lot of things have come to light. First of all, at last I found the reason Eddie detested me so strongly. Eddie apparently asked my mother if he might bring his mother to live with them when they first began dating. Not comfortable with the thought of them moving in together so quickly, my mother had said no. She particularly objected to the notion of his sick mother living with him. Though Eddie had made it clear that his mother had a full-time nurse to look after her, she felt that having Eddie's mother live with us would be too much effort for her and declined. Eddie needs someone around to offer emotional support solely. Not ready to move in with Eddie, my mother wanted the extra burden of having her mother-in-law live with her gone. She blamed all on me rather than being direct with Eddie. About 3 months into their relationship, which was already somewhat serious, this happened. That was my mother's decision. I didn't want to say anything even though I felt it was too soon for them to be thinking of such things. She lied to Eddie, telling him she would be cool with him moving home with his mother and kids. She said, though, that I might be trouble. Telling Eddie that I had drove away her former boyfriends as I wanted to protect her and still thought my parents may be reunited. My mother presented me as a young criminal. She said she didn't want Eddie's mother to suffer because of me and she didn't want to break my heart. She also informed Eddie I had spoken negatively of his family. She said I had vowed to make his mother's life miserable should she move in and referred to her as a useless burden. She further claimed that I spoke of his children as little evil goblins destined to destroy our family. These are things I would never say since, for me, they are callous and utterly out of line. But Eddie thought her. He then stopped interacting with me totally since he wanted nothing to do with me. Although I had always behaved properly around him, he trusted my mother's lies. He had no reason to mistrust such allegations. I learned about all of this some many days ago. Eddie had been pushing my mother to cut relations and disown me for what I had allegedly done. She had to come clean and reveal the truth at last when she objected. Eddie was astounded to find, based on things my mother had told him, he had been mistreating me for years. She had lied since she was too terrified to tell him she was the one not wanting his sick mother to live with us. Eddie and my mother live apart these days. Eddie was shocked he had treated me so badly over something untrue. Eddie even said in an email that if my mother had simply been honest with him, he would not have had a problem. Had she told him she lacked the bandwidth to tend to a sick relative, he would have devised a plan with his sister to alternate in looking after their mother. She instead decided to lie and invented a terrible tale about me. Eddie emailed me also apologizing for what he had put me through and hoping I could pardon him. I'm still digesting how I feel, thus I haven't answered yet. Right now, I want to keep my thoughts clean and avoid obsessing over this. Eddie had been mistreating me for so long since falsehoods my mother had told him caused him to change. She let it happen since it suited her. She even gave him tales about how I was running afoul of rules at the institution. He trusted her totally, hence he never even questioned it. We never communicated, thus he never knew that I was really a regular man, which prevented the exposure of my mother's lies. I have to admit, she is one twisted person. Knowing all of this, my father is now seeking full custody. Claiming she loved us and wanted us to be a happy family, my mother is depressed. But I'm sorry. Wrecking everyone else's life does not allow you to have a content family on your own terms. Update 2. Eddie is apparently seeking divorce in addition to my dad seeking complete custody. My mother wrote my dad a lot of texts pleading him to talk to Eddie and mend things since she can't live without all of us. I wonder how she even expects us to listen to her after all she did. Knowing full well that she had been lying about me to her husband, she made sure I was treated badly and didn't have any issues for so many years. I wish that nobody ever suffers something like this at the hands of their own mother. She merely cared about herself and nothing else, yet I continued wondering what I did wrong and why I was despised by her husband and his family for no reason. I have blocked her everywhere and desire never to interact with her ever once more. I loved her and wanted her to be happy, so over the past few years I put up so much. She obviously just gave her personal happiness first priority and felt different about her own son. That renders two of us who gave her happiness top priority. Well, not anymore. Update 3. Eddie has formally asked for divorce. Right now, that is absolutely all anyone in my family or among the mutual friends of my parents is talking about. My mother is handling this in a very unusual manner by sharing depressing remarks on social media, screenshots of which I constantly getting from my cousins. Though I'm not sure what she expects, that is most certainly not going to help. She dug her tomb. Now she had to lie in it. Update 4. My dad owns me entirely right now. After a few months, my mother fought valiantly, but the divorce and all the evidence of what she went through made things extremely difficult for her. She truly had no chance since we had all the evidence required, even though her attorney stretched the matter out for a few months. Nevertheless, since my dad is the custodial parent, I no longer have to see my mother if I so wish not to see her. She does have visitation rights, but I'm not sure why that would be relevant given I no longer wish to interact with her. Living with my father makes me pleased. Everything is going rather nicely. I'm excited to move on. I've even made plans with friends. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please Please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.